Most of the world have been on the sands of Afghanistan. The Conservative Party has been gazing at the sands of Blackpool. Some of the party, still wandering around like survivors of Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, are glad they're not being scrutinised too closely. Jeremy Vines there at the Imperial Hotel.
Jeremy, thanks a lot. I was talking to a shadow cabinet member earlier today. He was preparing his speech and he said we've all been put in a very difficult position by the leadership. We've been told no jokes, don't talk about policies, and don't attack the government, which he said doesn't leave me with many options. But then his party has found itself with only one public task this week, which is to support the government. The names are a detail here. The all-new shadow cabinet and its star support would have been lampooned if the sketch writers were in town. But seriousness and even unity are prevailing. Today, at least, the Conservatives were back in the mainstream. First came the national anthem, and then
the Right Honourable Ian Duncan Smith.
A leader of the opposition who begins this conference uniquely with no intention of opposing anything the government is doing.
I know that our debates over the next 2 days will properly reflect the duty of a loyal opposition that these exceptional circumstances demand. We will be measured, constructive, and true to the interests of our country.
So no domestic policies have yet surfaced here, but that may actually help the Tories. There is a theory travelling around Blackpool, inasmuch as any theory can travel around a conference as badly overshadowed as this one, that the Conservatives have been lucky with the timing of these attacks, in part because Ian Duncan Smith's military bearing tends to suit this kind of situation, but also because, as one insider told me, the new front bench are still working out what their portfolios are. And this, he said, buys us thinking time. After 2 failed leadership bids, John Redwood has a lot of time to think. And today he was off to tell a fringe audience their party should drop its line on cannabis and Section 28 and allow a free vote. Is it a move towards the centre ground that you're trying to somehow disguise with a sleight of hand?
No, I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to say that I don't think these issues will make all the difference in the general election. But they're obviously causing a lot of passion and disagreement within the party. So let's diffuse them by giving people the right to their own beliefs and to vote accordingly.
Later on, incidentally, the former cabinet minister offered party members at least one reason to be cheerful.
My view is it is a good time to be a Conservative. I know this is not a popular view in the media at the moment, but looking at what we've just been through, surely it can't get worse.
Well, it could, because the Conservatives know that in their weakened state, they are now being targeted by the Lib Dems, who want to take over as the main opposition. So this from the chairman.
One of the first things I will do is set up a new unit to challenge the Liberal Democrats. They have been...
This was the loudest cheer of the day, and that is the one area of politics as usual that is happening here, walloping the Lib Dems. I'm joined now in the reception of the Imperial Hotel by Michael Ancram, the Shadow Foreign Secretary and Conservative Deputy Leader. Just to get one point clear, are the Conservatives suggesting now that the Allies should be attacking Iraq?
No, what we're saying, and we've said it before now, is that if there is incontrovertible evidence, which there isn't as we understand it at the moment, that Iraq was involved either in the incident in America or was involved in the sponsorship of terrorism, then we would expect as robust a response as we're seeing at the moment.
And those kinds of signals have caused Ming Campbell just to say on Newsnight earlier that you shouldn't be talking about strikes on Iraq in a loose kind of way.
We're not talking about them in a loose kind of way at all. That's why we're talking about incontrovertible evidence, which, as I say, isn't there at the moment. But what we have to make absolutely clear is that if this is an international fight against terrorism on a worldwide scale, we can't choose which terrorism we go for. Terrorism is terrorism. I made that point in my speech today. What we're saying to the government is we've got to make sure that people don't think we're just having a go at bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, because that also is destabilising. Our fight is with terrorism, because terrorism is the enemy of democracy and of freedom.
Just on the party conference here, it's impossible to ignore the fact no Heath, no Thatcher, no Heseltine, no Clark, no Major, no Portillo. What are they all trying to tell you?
I think they're trying to tell us anything. I've been coming to conferences since 1968, and people come and go at conferences, and they always have, and I suspect they always will. What we're doing at this conference is, in very difficult circumstances because of the international situation, we're showing how the attitudes of our party have changed from the lessons we learned at the general election. We will be spending tomorrow talking about those vital issues which matter to people: education, health, welfare. Those are the things that people said to us they didn't feel we understood well enough. We're showing now, although our policies will take time to develop, that we do understand what is worrying people, and that we are going to address them, and we're going to address them as a matter of priority.
Do you feel Lady Thatcher's absence is helpful?
I've always taken the view at conferences that people come and they make their mark and then they go. This conference is about Ian Duncan Smith. It's about a new leader of the party. It's about the change of attitude in the party that is stemming from that change of leadership.
I asked that question because a very senior colleague of yours, Gary Streeter, who's a vice chairman of the Conservative Party, has said that actually maybe the Conservatives need their own clause 4, and that would be to radically repudiate the policies of Lady Thatcher. Do you agree with that?
I don't think it's a question of repudiation. What happens is politics moves on. Her policies were policies which actually built this country up dramatically during the 1980s. We're now at the beginning of the 21st century. The problems are different, the challenges are different. Those are the challenges we're addressing.
Well, that's a polite repudiation, isn't it?
No, it isn't. I mean, I've been in politics many, many years, and I've seen politics develop because politics is dynamic. And you can't be static, you can't stick in the position you've always been. I was part of Mrs. Thatcher's government in the 1980s. I saw what we did in housing and all sorts of other areas. Exciting, dynamic. But now we're in a different time, and we've got to address those new priorities now in a modern way.
Michael Ancram at the beginning of the Conservative Party conference here in Blackpool. Thanks very much indeed. Back to the studio.
Well, now some other news. It's farewell tonight to the company which proved brilliant at manufacturing excuses and hopeless at running the railways. But in a counterpunch, Railtrack, which is to be wound up, tonight said it had sued the government for millions of pounds worth of frozen assets. Yesterday, the boss was begging his staff to rally around the company in a time of crisis. Today, he walked out saying the way the government had treated the firm was shoddy and unacceptable. Rail passengers have been saying much the same thing about the way the company treats them for years. Our business correspondent Paul Mason reports.
When the government took control of Britain's railways at the start of World War II, it was part of a grand design. The wartime emergency eventually led to British Rail, an integrated state-owned network that lasted 50 years. Railtrack has lasted just 5. Yesterday, the government pulled the plug on the privatised rail infrastructure company. That had more to do with accident than design. Accidents like Paddington, Southall, Hatfield, and some would say rail privatisation itself.
This means the end of Railtrack. It means a new beginning for our railways.
Railtrack needed government funds, but the government had had enough. It forced Railtrack into administration. Its shares were suspended and may now be worthless. Railtrack's chief executive immediately resigned and hurled a bitter parting shot. The government's treatment of my company and its shareholders has been shoddy and unacceptable. Commitments, whether financial or otherwise, are made to be kept, not broken. Mr. Byers will learn that 40-year-old rails are broadly neutral on the public-private partnership debate. Either way, they need hard cash to replace them, and soon. By miraculous coincidence, the government had a plan. The think tank IPPR, which is close to New Labour, had been working on a blueprint for a non-profit replacement for Railtrack since February.
In place of commercial objectives, it will have public interest objectives, which include high standards of safety, but also maximising the use of the railways for passengers and freight. Although it can make profits, any profits that it does make will be reinvested into the system for the benefit of the railways. Instead of shareholders, it will have members.
In fact, the new company will look more like a housing association than a PLC. The government will not play a role directly, but it'll work through the Strategic Rail Authority. The SRA will appoint the chairman and nominate members of the company, including train operating companies, freight companies, rail passenger groups and trade unions. It's not renationalisation, but it is the very embodiment of stakeholder capitalism. Helpfully for Gordon Brown, any money it borrows will not show up on the Treasury's books. It's been told to borrow £30 billion from the big investment banks. But the government won't underwrite these new debts. So will this city be prepared to lend?
The government to have actually pulled the trigger effectively, I think has surprised more people. Whether the market to be reticent to invest in another company again, I think people have just got to realise there is no automatic guarantee from the government. We've seen that in Eurotunnel, we've seen that in various other transactions, and the government has now proved that to be correct.
But killing off Railtrack is only part of a wider plan. The government thinks it could open the way for new vertically integrated companies, mini versions of the old British Rail with trains and tracks back under one management. But some are sceptical.
What we have to have is close collaboration between train operators, Railtrack and the maintenance contractors. But that can take place in different companies. You know, different companies can collaborate together. And one of the encouraging things of the last few months has been a strong sort of motivation or a strong momentum behind local collaboration between the TOCs and the Railtrack.
Steel wheel on steel rail. It's a technology nearly 200 years old. But running a network based on this technology always carries heavy costs. You need huge amounts of money to upgrade and maintain the tracks. It was those costs that sunk Railtrack. But will Railtrack's demise now lead to a wider rethink of Labour's policy on public-private partnership?
The IPPR plan was based on a similar experience at Welsh Water, and it could be applied to other controversial projects.
One might have used this model, for example, for National Air Traffic Services. It could have been an option for London Underground. We already have a situation where the trust ports are run on a not-for-profit basis, housing associations are not-for-profit. There is a variety of different public enterprises where a not-for-profit model can be appropriate.
So should the end of Railtrack mean a rethink on the hotly debated plans for private sector involvement on the London Underground?
Ministers are always saying to me, this is just about saving face. We all know it's going to be a disaster, but you know, the Treasury are determined to get its way. And it's the same Treasury officials who've advised John Major on privatising British Rail drew up this plan for the partial privatisation of the Underground.
Railtrack's collapse leaves the government casting around for new, creative solutions to the basic problem of privatisation. How do you bring the private sector into public services if there are little or no profits to be made?
Paul Mason, we asked for an interview with the Minister, but they refused to supply one. Leaves on the line from Westminster, I suppose. Now, in a moment, a look at tomorrow's papers. Before that, though, a roundup of today's news. Our main story tonight, the Defence Secretary Jeff Hoon has told Newsnight that the airstrikes could last just days rather than weeks. British troops may also be involved in ground action. All 118 people on board an SAS flight from Italy to Denmark have been killed after their plane collided on the ground with a light aircraft. The accident happened at Linate Airport near Milan. The plane first hit a small aircraft that had strayed onto the runway, then veered into an airport building. The airport's ground radar apparently wasn't working at the time. The Ulster Unionist leader, David Trimble, says his ministers may resign from the Stormont executive. The threat follows a failed attempt by the Unionists to have Sinn Féin expelled from the power-sharing executive because of the IRA's failure to decommission weapons. And the markets, the FT 100 share index closed down 3 points at 5033. In New York, the Dow Jones closed down 52 at 9068. Against the pound, the euro closed up. Against the dollar, sterling closed down. Tomorrow morning's front pages, the Times, America turns sights on Iraq. That letter to the UN Security Council, warning of possible targets elsewhere, leading the front page of the Times. The Daily Telegraph, allies braced for a long war, or as Tony Blair called it in the House of Commons tonight, a long haul. The Independent, day two, the pounding goes on. And underneath that, the news that a government spin doctor has said the government should use the fact there's such an international crisis to bury bad news. In other words, to sneak it out without people noticing. The Daily Mail, no mercy, their headline on the airstrikes. We bomb Taliban troops in the Sun. And the Daily Express, freed from Taliban hell, the news that Yvonne Ridley's been freed, and a subhead, I risk death to keep secret diary for Express readers. That's all from Newsnight for tonight, but there's more coverage of the attacks on Afghanistan on News 24, which you can see over on BBC One right now. I'll be back with more tomorrow. Until then, from all of us on the programme, good night.
Hello, good evening. There has been some heavy rain around today, particularly close to the low pressure system to the north, and also with all these blustery showers that have been filtering in across more southern areas of the British Isles. It's still quite showery now in the extreme southeast. But in the next 24 hours there will be a subtle change. Our low gradually eases away into the North Sea and Norway, and then we see this little ridge of high pressure building from the west. So hopefully fewer showers through the afternoon before the next weather system starts to roll in during Tuesday night and Wednesday. Tuesday's forecast then, a lot of cloud around. There will be some showers too through the morning, possibly more persistent rain to the northeast of Scotland, and also some sharp showers running through the eastern channel into parts of Sussex and Kent. Some rather tricky travelling conditions there. But through the day, some changes. High pressure builds, the showers ease off, and I think there will be some decent brightness in the afternoon, even a little sunshine. Feeling a little bit better as well after such a windy couple of days, less windy, westerly breezes, with temperatures creeping up to 16 or 17 Celsius. Now for the rest of the week, well, that front that I mentioned, that pushes into more central and southern areas during Wednesday with showers to the north. But if you follow the front out here into the Atlantic, it actually starts to push back northwards again during Thursday. Close to that low, we're going to have some heavier rain and again the winds picking up. Then for Friday, the front moves down into more central parts of Britain. So basically it's going to be quite unsettled in some central and northern areas, pulses of rain. But in the south, an influence of high pressure from the near continent and a chance that we could have a few days of quieter and drier weather. And it's going to be reasonably mild in the south as well. Temperatures shown by these oranges getting up to around 18 to 20 Celsius and possibly very warm in some areas towards the end of the week and the weekend, especially if the sun breaks through. So let's just take a look at the trend. And it's quite a mixed week really, that's the general trend. For Tuesday, as that ridge builds, there'll be fewer showers, especially through the afternoon. For the remainder of the week though, rain for central and northern parts of Britain on that front. In the south, drier and actually quite warm. That's the weather.